Hey everybody, so I wanted to give some advice about filling out the thesis outline planner. So this planner is going to be for your informative paper. So the first thing I want to do is talk about informative papers. What is an informative paper? I think one of the things I asked you guys to do was kind of look over the breakdown of the entire unit earlier so you can get an idea. And you'll see that this unit is mostly focused on talking about plagiarism and then talking about this informative paper. The next unit, unit 3, is when you'll be writing an argument paper. And an argument paper is one where you're going to be putting forth some kind of opinion and some kind of claim. A lot of times students tend to think about thesis statements in terms of arguments. Probably the way you've been taught most of your life is, oh, you need to write a thesis statement, which means you need to explain your opinion. Well, it depends on the type of paper you're writing. In an informative paper, remember that a thesis statement is really just the main idea of a piece of writing. So sometimes you can have thesis statements that don't offer up an opinion, that don't say, well, we need to do this or this is a problem. They just provide information. And that's what you're doing in this paper. The informative paper, one way to think about it is that it is a report. You're giving a report on the things you found. You picked a topic, you went out and researched it, and you're bringing it back and reporting. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be an emotionless robot. Let's say you're reporting on something that's incredibly topical, that involves things that are sad, that involves things that are hard, that involves things that are controversial. Many of you chose topics like that. It doesn't mean that you can't report back with what's happening. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. But the focus of this paper is to inform people about what's going on. So it's the same way that you might read a news article. For instance, the one I posted about what's going on in Texas. There are articles that exist about why what's happening in Texas points to a larger issue or is a failing or things along those lines that offer up an opinion. And then there are also articles that are literally just explaining this is what is going on. And even in the articles that say this is what is going on, there are stories that are heartbreaking. That is fine. This paper is like the stories that are providing the information. You are giving the facts. So sometimes people worry that about being biased in informational papers. They'll think well, I just need to stay really completely unbiased. If it's a fact, it's not biased. If your statistics are upsetting, that's okay. You can still include them in this informative paper, but the difference is you're not offering up an argument one way or the other yet. Because this is a nice paper to write before you get into the argument paper. You are looking into the way things really are. You said, I want to look into this topic, and you then went forward and researched, okay, here's what I learned about this topic. Because that's a great basis for you to then move forward and make an argument. So an informative thesis is not necessarily a type of thesis that you've written before, because it's just going to be there to inform. And my piece of advice to you guys about writing the thesis in this particular assignment is to do it last. So I'm going to instruct a planner for an informative paper. This is my informative planner. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, and if you don't want to, if you want to think about your title, that's fine. I'm just going to I'm going to stick with the same topic I've been doing because I want to show you guys something with the planner I wrote for the literature review. So dress codes. And maybe I'll be cutesy and I'll put in an attention grabber kind of title. It seems pretty dumb though, because I can't see what you guys are wearing, and I think you all know by now I don't care. All right, but let's say no more pajamas, dress codes in higher education. That's my funny little joke. It's not that funny. That's whatever. You could just name it dress codes in higher education if you want. I don't really care. The thing about titles is the purpose of a title is to grab the reader's attention and make sure that the reader is gonna engage. If you think about it, like clickbait articles work on the principle of having good titles, but the purpose of the title is somewhat lost in this particular situation because I have to read your paper even if you give it the most boring title known to man. So I would like you to try and force yourself to get all the aspects of your topic in. Like if somebody turned in something like this and just said dress codes, I'm really focusing on college, so that should probably be part of it. But if you don't want to have anything like that, you don't have to. Just dress codes in higher education. We'll go with that. Okay, so thesis, I'm going to save it for later because I'm going to make the thesis up from the headings that I'm creating. And the headings I'm creating, I'm going to look back and see if it's possible for me to use what I've already created. And by that, I mean, I'm going to look into my literature review planner, which frankly, I thought I already had pulled up. Okay, so content. All right. So if I look at my literature review planner, the reason I'm doing this is because one thing you can do is you can think about these research questions as a place of inspiration for the sections of your paper. Because basically what you're going to do with this informative paper is you're going to break it down into 3 sections. And if your questions don't really lead you to an entire section, that's okay. You can change these. But I'm going to check and see what I've got. So I said in my literature review that I wanted to research whether there were dress codes in place in most colleges, whether these dress codes were actually enforced, and what the reasons were behind having them. And I did my research and I found sources that spoke to these, and I feel like these are good things to include. So I am going to take this question, are there dress codes in place in most colleges? And I'm going to make that the basis of my first subheading. For this, my next question that I had was, are these dress codes actually enforced? So I'm going to look at these and I'm going to think about them because I've done a little research now and you can see that there are supporting points listed under here and sources that I'm going to use. So I'm going to think about it for a minute and I'm going to say, what am I going to use to support these points? Because each of these APA headings is going to be a section of your paper. I have a feeling that this one is going to be one of my longer sections. This is going to be a longer section. I might not have a lot to say about this, so this might be a shorter section. And I'm going to think about what points I can include in each of these. And those points will likely become paragraphs. So I'll probably, if I'm going for a paper that's going to have some length to it, maybe I'll write a page about this or a page and a half about this, page and a half about this, page about this. I'm not going to plan it out that intensely yet, but I do want you to keep in mind that you don't want to put anything here that's just kind of a throwaway. So like if you can answer it in one sentence, you're going to need to come up with a more substantial heading. So dress codes in higher education, what am I going to say in there? I'm going to say, so probably what I would do is my plan is to break it down by now that I've done the research. And so like you aren't going to be able to do the exact same thing I'm doing right now because we have different topics. But for my topic, I noticed those patterns I talked about where there were very particular types of schools. So maybe I'm going to have a paragraph about community colleges. Maybe I'm going to have a paragraph about business schools. Maybe I'm going to have a paragraph about HBCUs. Maybe I'm going to have a paragraph about religious schools. And as I'm looking at my sources, it might turn out that I only have a couple sentences maybe about business, or like maybe community colleges and business schools have the same reasons for having dress codes. So maybe I combine those into a paragraph. It all depends on me and my research. So having done this research, albeit a long time ago, I know that community colleges and business schools tend to focus on this idea of like getting students into professional dress, although business schools sometimes focus a little more on networking. But because I know that they have like a similar approach, maybe I want to put them in a paragraph. Maybe not. If I have enough to make it its own paragraph, then I'll make it its own paragraph. Because the dress codes in higher education that I found is that there are types of dress codes, but not, it doesn't seem like a dress code would be implemented at maybe just, you know, your standard average four-year university. But there are some places that more often than not are trending with having these dress codes. So I'm going to break down these as the kind of places that have them. And then I realized that maybe it's a little strange to include this down here. Maybe it belongs up here. So I'm going to move this because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to talk about the fact that there are all these different schools that have their own reasons and then not soon after get into the reasons. So maybe I'm going to write a paragraph about professionalism, networking, and a paragraph about and I think that some of the reasons that I found in the one article about HBCUs included some of these overlapping reasons. So like the focus on like employability and like professional, like depending on the HBCU, like a focus on like a business school would focus on kind of employability. I don't know. So for each of these, I would kind of include, I would go over these reasons and I would talk about maybe the types of schools and the reasoning behind it. So this section, enforcing dress codes in higher education. So I would maybe in this one talk about a couple different things. Enforcing dress codes in higher education. So the importance of clear policies. So these are the things that I think the topics that I'm going to cover in here. And maybe reasons for enforcing ends up somewhere in here along with importance of clear policies. What I'm going to talk about in this section, what I'm planning to talk about in this section, is maybe the important, like talking about how it's important that in these places there is a really clear policy. And maybe in here I'll also talk about the fact that, believe it or not, there is a certain expectation of how you should dress, even at a place like Del Tech. I don't think that that policy, many people know, I don't think that that policy is ever enforced. And if it is, I don't know if it's fairly enforced across the board. So having said that, maybe I'll talk about this idea of like, okay, well, places that do enforce have clear policies. Here are the things, like maybe you get sent home. I don't know if you get kicked out in a religious school. I have to look back at my sources. But these are the types of things I'm going to cover here. And then my sources is the last thing I'm going to show you guys. And I'm literally just going to put in sources. For each section, look at your sources and figure out where they belong. So you can have them appear in multiple places, and that's fine. And that's what I'm looking for. I'll post this example too.